KADAVA. By Harvey. Click. Going to West Virginia to watch an ant die didn't sound like much fun, but Brad wanted to make the best of it since it was the closest thing to a vacation he would have that summer. At least the twisty mountain roads were a nice change from the straight streets of Cincinnati. They passed through the tiny town of Clarkton, and about 15 minutes later Mother turned onto a one-lane gravel road with no name and very little gravel. They bounced along it slowly for several miles past a few miserable-looking houses and a deep ravine. She slowed to a crawl as she edged past it, and Brad wondered how many wrecked vehicles lay at the bottom. She was a nervous driver, and he would have been happier with his father at the wheel, but father was too busy with his construction work to come along. He would have been a welcome buffer between Brad and the unpleasantness that always hung over his aunt's household like a poisonous fog. He would have gone fishing and hiking with Brad, anything to get the two of them away from the constant tension, relieved only by screaming matches. Aunt Jenny's place suddenly sprang into view around a turn. Though it needed paint, it was bigger and better kept than any of the houses they'd seen for the past hour. It had 2 stories plus a tall attic with 2 gables in front of the steep roof and 2 more in back that faced Aunt Jenny's 200 acres of hilly wasteland. Mother parked in the gravel lot beside the garage. They were getting their suitcases from the trunk when the front screen door banged and Earl stepped out onto the front porch. He watched them with his burly arms crossed. Mother gave him a little wave, but he didn't wave back. When they reached the porch Mother said, "Hello, Earl, I hope you're well," and he grunted. "Is Katie here yet?" she asked, and he said, "Nope." He didn't offer to take Mother's suitcase, but at least he held the screen door open. The living room was gloomy with the drapes drawn shut and just one dim lamp turned on. Aunt Jenny was lying in a cot against the wall. Mother put down her suitcases and gently squeezed her sister's shrunken white hand. "It's Jane," she said quietly. "Brad and I came to see you." Brad stared down at her and said, "Hello, Aunt Jenny." Her lips moved slightly, but she didn't speak or open her eyes, which were sunk deeply into her withered white face. It was hard to believe she was only 40, just 5 years older than his mother. The room was hot and stuffy and stank horribly, as if her flesh were already rotting. "She don't hear you," Earl said. "She's doped up on morphine." Brad and his mother moved away from the cot, his mother looking nearly as pale as her sister. Earl was still standing near the front door, his arms crossed and his broad, unkind face devoid of expression. "When's Katie coming?" Mother asked, and he shrugged. She said, "She is coming, isn't she?" And he shrugged again. "Well, I guess we'll take our things upstairs," she said. "Which room should I take?" "You'll have it to take that little one down the hall so Katie can have her old room, assumin' she ever gets here. Brad can sleep in Butch's room. They don't always get along." Earl shrugged again, and Mother asked, "Is Butch around?" "Somewhere I guess. He keeps outdoors a lot." Earl went to the kitchen, making it clear he'd had enough conversation. Brad and his mother lugged their suitcases upstairs, which was even hotter and stuffier than the downstairs. He was used to air conditioning and wondered how he was going to survive an indefinite stay in this place, which felt more like a greenhouse than a home. Indefinite because nobody knew how soon Aunt Jenny would die, maybe a day from now, maybe a month, and Mother would surely want to stay until she was in the ground. She had already driven down by herself twice this summer, but that was while Aunt Jenny was still in the hospital in Charleston, and Mother had stayed in a motel. After the chemo treatments the doctors had operated, but when they opened her up they found more cancer than they could cut out, so Aunt Jenny had decided to die at home. Brad tapped on Butch's bedroom door and opened it when there was no response. The room was filthy as always, dirty clothes and toys all over the floor and a wad of sheets yellow with sweat and general grime on the narrow bed. Butch was 13, the same age as Brad, but he still kept a big dilapidated teddy bear on his bed and other childish toys everywhere you looked. One time Brad had been told to share the bed with him, and ever since then he'd brought along an air mattress, but sleeping on the floor was no treat either because the house had mice and insects. The one window was open with a torn screen, but no breeze was blowing in and the room was hot and steamy. Brad put his suitcase and duffel bag on the floor and wondered where he was supposed to put his clothes. The dresser drawers were crammed with Butch's stuff and so was the tiny closet, and the clothes tucked inside them looked just as dirty as the ones on the floor. He spent a minute looking at the clay figures on the dresser, mostly horrible animals you wouldn't find in a zoo. Sculpting clay was about the only indication that any sort of intelligence lurked in Cousin Butch's head, but judging by the grotesque figures it wasn't a healthy sort of intelligence. Brad got his air mattress from the duffel bag and began inflating it. He was feeling dizzy from all the blowing when he heard a sound and turned around to see Butch standing in the bedroom doorway with his arms crossed just like Earl's. "Hey," Brad said. Butch just stared, his dark blue eyes looking more like polished stones than flesh. His round face was sunburned almost the color of his greasy red hair, and a pink blotch was visible on his pudgy nose where the skin had peeled off. He was wearing dirty blue overalls, which made him look like a fat little hick, and beneath them a filthy white t-shirt. At last he pulled his lip up in a kind of snarl, showing his jagged teeth, and said, "I don't want you in my room." "I don't want to be in your room either," Brad said. "Stinks like a toilet in here." "Then move your shit somewhere else." "Earl told me to sleep here." "Fuck Earl. I'm telling you to sleep somewhere else." "Afraid I'll steal your teddy bear?" "Fuck you." Brad turned his back on Butch and continued inflating his mattress. Suddenly he was shoved from behind. He landed on his hands and knees and rolled just in time to avoid being kicked in the head. He pulled Butch down to the floor by the bib of his overalls and they rolled through the toys and dirty clothes, punching and kicking until Mother yelled, "Stop it." She was standing in the doorway, her small fists doubled with anger and dismay. "What's wrong with you boys?" she yelled in a small voice, as if hoping no one else would hear. "Jenny's dying downstairs, and you're up here fighting. What on earth is wrong with you?" She stopped her quiet yelling when Earl pushed past her into the bedroom, a thick black belt doubled up in his right hand. He grabbed Butch by the front of his overalls and flung him face down on the bed. "Get him down," he said. Butch unbuckled the straps of his overalls and pulled him down to his knees. He wasn't wearing underwear, and his plump butt was already covered with fresh-looking welts. Earl whipped him furiously until Brad's mother yelled, "Stop it, Earl. You're going to injure him." Earl turned and glared at her. "Don't you ever tell me what to do in my own house," he said. He didn't raise his voice and didn't have to, it was like steel. "It's not even your house," Mother said weakly. "It's Jenny's house. It'll be my house right soon, once she's in the ground. That's what her will says." Earl strode out of the room and headed down the stairs. Mother began to cry. "Are you okay, Butch?" she asked. He didn't answer. He had already pulled up his pants and was sitting on the bed, his pudgy round face impassive. After a few seconds he lay down with his back to them and hugged his teddy bear close to his chest. Fistfights with Butch weren't uncommon. He'd always had a sudden and violent temper, even when he was little more than a toddler. One minute he'd be quietly pouting, and the next minute his fists would be flailing. Mother was in the kitchen making a grocery list. Brad looked in the refrigerator, hoping for a bottle of pop, but there was nothing except beer. He filled a glass with tap water and was heading out the back door when Mother said, "Wait a minute. Your nose is bleeding." She tried to hold a paper towel to his nose, but he snatched it away from her and went outside. He sat on the steps of the little back stoop, dabbed his nose and then blew it. That stopped the bleeding. He was sipping his tepid water and wishing he were back in Cincinnati when the screen door slammed behind him and Butch said, "Hey, ain't you gone yet?" Brad looked back over his shoulder and was pleased to see a trickle of blood coming out of his nose. Butch sat down beside him as if they were the best of friends. "I guess maybe you can sleep in my room if you promise not to fart," he said. "It stinks so bad in there you wouldn't know if I did." Mother stuck her head out and said, "I'm making a grocery run. Want to come with me, Brad?" "Nope. But get me some Mountain Dew." "Are you boys going to be alright?" "Yeah, we're okay. What about you, Butch?" "Coke, root beer, 7-Up." Butch didn't answer right away. Brad glanced at him and saw that he was surprised, maybe even confused by the question. "Any of them sound real good, Aunt Jane," he said, "and I thank you." "You're welcome, Butch. You boys behave yourselves while I'm gone." The screen door shut and a minute later Brad heard her car pulling onto the road. "Is she gonna want me to pay for that pop?" Butch asked. "I don't have no money." "Of course not. Does your mother make you pay for pop?" "My mother's too sick to buy pop. She's dying." "I know she is. I mean, did she make you pay for it before she was dying?" "Nope. Earl didn't allow her to buy no pop." "Does he always beat you like that?" "Sometimes. Don't make no difference to me." Butch lowered his voice to a whisper and said, He ain't gonna be doing it much longer anyhow. Why's that? He just ain't. So you just wanna sit here all day or you wanna see some cool stuff? Brad followed Butch into the unmown backyard, which soon descended into a swampy valley with tall hills on both sides. Trees and scrubby brush grew in tangled profusion, and the high weeds were full of tree roots and fallen branches to trip over. They stopped at a handmade cage trap hidden inside a grove of gnarly honeysuckles. It was empty except for a rotting carrot. "Shit," Butch said. He continued to another trap nearby. A fat brown rabbit was huddled inside it, sniffing the air and looking depressed. "Brilliant," Butch said. "Is that for dinner?" Brad asked. He had never eaten rabbit before and didn't think he wanted to. "Not for your dinner." Butch looked at him intently and said, "Can you keep a secret?" "Sure I can. I mean keep it with your life. Keep it even if somebody's trying to torture it out of you." Brad could never read what devilment was behind his weird blue eyes, but their fierce determination made him hesitant to answer. "Well, can you or can't you?" Butch asked. "I guess I can." "Guess ain't good enough. You gotta swear you won't squeal or I won't show you." "Show me what?" "Do you swear?" "Okay, I swear." "That still ain't good enough. You gotta swear to God and everything you care about." "Okay. I swear to God and everything I care about that I won't squeal." "I still don't trust you," Butch said. "But I gotta show someone. It's too much to deal with all by myself." He picked up the cage trap by a wire handle at the top and headed through the weeds toward the tall hill to the south. Unlike Butch, Brad was wearing shorts and had a hard time pushing through all the thistles, thorns, and stinging nettle while also watching out for poison ivy and snakes. Especially snakes. "Hey, wait up a minute," he called. They reached the base of the tall hill and climbed for a while through scraggly brush sprouting from rocky dirt. Brad was soaked with sweat when Butch stopped at a ledge a short way up the hill. "Remember what you swore," Butch said. "I remember." "Remember you swore on your life. If you tell anybody you'll die." Above them the hillside was nearly vertical. A thick berry bush grew on the ledge, and Butch squeezed between it and the steep bare hillside. Brad followed him reluctantly, worried rattlesnakes could be hiding beneath the thorny bush. Butch had disappeared. "Hey, where are you?" Brad called. "In here." Butch's voice sounded hollow because it was coming from a tall crack in the rock, barely wide enough to squeeze through. Beyond the crack was darkness, but then a match was struck and a moment later a white light appeared as Butch lit a gas camping lantern, making his round face glow like a strange fluorescent mask inside the dark cave. "Come in," he said. Brad didn't like caves and didn't trust Butch. Maybe Butch was planning to club him to death in there, where his body would never be found. "Come in," I said. "Don't be a sissy ass." "What's in there?" "Something you never seen before." Brad turned sideways and edged through the crevice. A large adult wouldn't be able to get in there, certainly not Earl. He wondered if that was why Butch liked this place. It was an Earl-free zone. It was like a different world inside, the air was cool and damp, and all the outdoor sounds were gone. The cave was a deep cleft in the rock about 4 feet wide, taller than their heads and deeper than the light reached. Butch turned and strode farther into the cave, the cage trap in one hand and the bright camping lantern in the other, its stark shadows swaying madly as he walked. Brad kept close to him, not wanting to be left in the darkness. He stubbed his toe on a rock. "Hey, slow down," he said, and his voice sounded deep and weird. "Quiet. This is a holy place. It ain't meant for talking." The passageway ended in a roundish cavern about 8 feet in diameter. There was a pit in the center of the floor maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. Butch held his lantern above it so Brad could see inside. It was no deeper than a bathtub. A large number of snakes were writhing inside it, and beneath them was something that looked like a child's body. Butch set his trap on the cave floor and handed the lantern to Brad. "Hold it up so I can see what I'm doing," he said. He spoke quietly, as if loath to break the silence of this holy place. Kneeling at the edge, he reached down and grasped one of the snakes and threw it out of the pit to the other side. It looked to Brad like a copperhead. "Damn, those things are gonna bite you," he said. "Hush. I know what I'm doing, I do this every day. Snakes like her, she draws them like a magnet." He threw out another one and another, seemingly oblivious to the fangs as his hand darted down again and again to grasp yet another. Brad saw a growing carpet of snakes writhing angrily on the other side of the pit, and he was afraid they'd slither through the shadows over to the side where he stood. He was so intent on watching the floor near his feet that he scarcely glanced at the body lying at the bottom of the pit. Butch threw out the last snake, stood and took the lantern from Brad. He held it up high and gazed down at the horrid figure. At first Brad thought it was the body of a naked girl, because it was female and no more than 4 feet tall, but the breasts were womanly. It appeared to have been dead for a while because the skin was slate gray and looked slimy, as if it was seeping some sort of putrescence. The face was sunken, its skin stretched tight over the cheekbones and the shut eyes sunk deep in their sockets. The skull was hairless and oddly shaped, the cranium large and the chin small and delicate. The lips were black or maybe dark purple, the nose was small and childlike, and the ears were large and pointed at the top. The small hands were crossed above the belly like hands in a casket, their nails long and black like talons. Aside from the sunken features and the gray, slimy skin, the body didn't seem to have decomposed, and the odor around the pit wasn't like a rotting body but more like some sickeningly sweet flower. Brad held his bandana against his nose. Child or woman, it didn't look altogether human, and Brad suddenly realized it was probably a plastic dummy that had been used in a carnival sideshow. He wondered how Butch had gotten his hands on it. "What is it?" he whispered. "She ain't in it, she's a she," Butch said quietly. "Her name is KADAVA." "How do you know that?" "She told me." "You're nuts. That thing's not alive." "Wanna bet?" Butch held the cage trap above the pit and unlatched the door. The figure's eyes snapped open as the terrified rabbit fell, and the small hand shot up and snatched it out of the air. The rabbit shrieked, but the sound was cut short when one of the talon-like fingernails sliced its neck open. The little gray woman held the rabbit's gaping throat to her mouth, slurping and swallowing noisily as the blood poured into her mouth. Brad backed away from the pit and let out a loud noise, halfway between a groan and a scream. Then he was dashing through the darkness, stumbling over rocks as he ran toward the narrow crevice of outdoor light glowing in the distance. "KADAVA comes from another world," Butch said. He and Brad were sitting at a dilapidated picnic table behind the house so they wouldn't be overheard. Evening was approaching, and the mosquitoes were thick. "You mean like a different planet?" Brad asked. "I don't know. She just says it's a different world." "Did she come in a spaceship?" "She don't need no spaceship. She can go anywhere she wants. She knows how to slip through the doorways of space." "Them's her own words." "You mean she talks to you?" "Of course she does. She don't have to move her lips. I can hear her talking inside my head and I don't even have to be close to her. She could start talking to me right now and I'd hear her. Maybe you just imagine she's talking to you. Like your teddy bear." "Fuck you. Did you just imagine what she done to the rabbit?" Brad sipped his Mountain Dew and swatted a mosquito. "So what's she doing in the cave?" "That's where I brung her and that's where she's staying till she gets better. She's sick right now. I think it's 'cause the air is different here, not what she's used to. But I'm feeding her every day, and she's getting her strength up, and when she gets good and strong there's gonna be hell to pay." "How'd you find her?" "I didn't find her, she found me. I started having dreams about her every night. They wasn't ordinary dreams, and I remembered them perfect after I woke up. She told me how I could bring her here, so I did exactly what she said. First I took some modeling clay and made it look just like her. I worked on it for days and days till I got it just right. She told me she'd need a private place to rest up for a spell, so I took my clay model to that there cave, where nobody could find her, and I set it down in the pit. There wasn't no snakes in there at the time, she drew them to her later on. I spent a whole afternoon kneeling over the clay model, saying the words she taught me over and over. I ain't telling 'em to you 'cause the words are meant just for me, but it was hard work saying 'em just right over and over, and when I was done I was so tired I couldn't hardly walk. I went home and the next day when I come back, there she was. She was awful weak then and couldn't hardly move. For a few days I had to cut the throats of the animals for her and feed their blood to her like she was a baby sucking on a bottle. But now she's getting strong and pretty soon she'll be able to come here to the house whenever I call her. And then what? That's for me to know and you to find out. And don't even think about ratting me out. She knows your face now, and she'll kill you if you squeal. She don't like you anyhow. Remember, she can slip through the doorways of space, so you won't be safe even if you're back home in Cincinnati. One night you'll be sleeping in your bed and you'll feel her fangs on your neck." Brad felt cold despite the heat. He shivered. "She has fangs?" he asked. Yep. Didn't you see them? No, I ducked out pretty quick. Butch opened his mouth to show off his jagged, pointy teeth, which were so badly in need of braces that he usually kept his mouth shut. They're sorta like mine, only sharper, he said. What is she, a vampire? Nope. Vampires are kid stuff. She eats vampires for dinner. They heard a car pull into the driveway, and a minute later Mother stuck her head out the back door. Come in, boys, she said. Katie's here. After the door shut, Butch said, Katie's one more person I can do without. But she's your sister. Half-sister, and she's a total bitch. I don't need that kind of trash round here. They found her in the living room lighting a cigarette just a few feet away from the sickbed. She glanced at the boys but didn't say hello. You shouldn't smoke around her, Brad's mother said. She's sick enough already. It's not your house, Katie said. She glanced at her sick mother for a few seconds and then turned away. Is there anything around here to eat? Supper's almost ready. Katie was wearing a short skirt and a lot of lipstick, and Earl wasn't trying to hide the fact he was ogling her. She was 9 years older than Butch and looked nothing like him, maybe because they had different fathers. Aunt Jenny had married when she was just 18 and gave birth to Katie 5 months after the wedding. Her husband soon won $500,000 in the lottery and died a year later in a car accident, leaving Jenny enough money to live on ever since. She'd had a string of lovers, including Butch's father, who disappeared before Butch was even born, and then for some reason she'd made the mistake of marrying Earl. I'll take your suitcase upstairs, Earl said. He let Katie start up the stairs first and stared up her short skirt as he followed. Brad turned his attention to Aunt Jenny, who was murmuring something faintly in her morphine stupor. He tried to make out what she was saying but couldn't. She looked nothing like the Aunt he remembered. Chemo had left her skull hairless, and her whole body seemed to have shrunk. Not only was she bone skinny, but she looked shorter too. The sickly white skin of her face was stretched tight over her cheekbones, and her shut eyes were sunk deep in their sockets. Her hands, which were quivering slightly on the quilt, looked like bones painted white. She reminded him of something, and it took him a minute to realize what. She looked like a paler version of KADAVA. For supper Mother had baked frozen fish sticks and frozen French fries. Earl washed his down with beer, and he smelled as if he'd been guzzling it all day. Katie was pouring down white wine so fast it seemed she was trying to catch up with him. Mother never drank much unless she was feeling under stress, but she had her own bottle of wine in front of her and was already working on her third glass. How soon's she going to die? Katie asked. Nobody knows, of course, Mother said. The doctor said it could be right away or another month. Well, if she's not dead in 3 days I'm going home, Katie said. My job don't pay for family leave. She pushed her plate aside and lit a cigarette. Mother had bought an apple pie, and after the boys finished eating their huge slices, Butch said, Come on, Brad, let's go sit on the front porch and watch the bats fly around. You don't get up from the table till you're excused, Earl said. Please excuse us, Butch said. All right, and keep out of the house for a while. We got things to discuss in here. The boys went out the front door, but before Brad could sit on one of the porch chairs Butch grabbed his arm and said, Shush. He led Brad around the side of the house to the back kitchen window, and they sat in the grass beneath it. Well, that's the way it is, whether you like it or not, Earl was saying. You're gonna see the will soon enough, so you'll know I'm not lying. It's not fair, Katie said. I'll get a fucking lawyer. I'm her daughter and everything should go to me. What about Butch? Mother asked. Butch don't need money, Katie said. He belongs in an institution. You can get all the fucking lawyers you want, Earl said, but it won't do you no good. Jenny was in her right mind when she wrote the will, long before she had cancer, and she ain't in her right mind now to change it. Right now she's what lawyers call non compos mentis. In her right mind she wouldn't give everything to you. I'm her daughter. Well, that's what she done, Earl said. Jenny was good and fed up with you, and she's always been fed up with Butch. He ain't in his right mind, and from what I hear he never has been. The day after the will's read I'm putting this place up for sale, and you'll have to get your pretty asses out of here. So what happens to Butch? Mother asked. Hell if I know, Earl said. I sure ain't gonna take care of him. That boy ain't right in the head. Don't look at me, Katie said. I got better things to worry about than a half-wit half-brother. Guess that leaves you, Jane, Earl said. or else an orphanage can take him. This is the most fucked up conversation I've ever heard in my entire life, Mother said. I'm not going to sit here and listen to any more of it. I'm going outside. The boys hurried around the side of the house and were sitting on the front steps when Mother came out to the porch. She sat on one of the chairs in the shadows and said nothing. Are you okay, Mom? Brad asked. Yes, I'm fine. She'd brought her bottle and glass out with her, and Brad watched her refill the glass and drink, staring out at the darkness. The next day there was a big raccoon in one of the traps. Brilliant, Butch said. Brad followed him up the slope to the ledge but refused to go into the cave. Are you turning sissy ass on me? Butch asked. Just remember, if you say one single word about this you're dead meat. It don't matter where you go, she'll find you. He lit his gas lantern and disappeared into the crevice. Brad didn't want to wait on the ledge, not with that creature in there, so he climbed down the hillside and sat on a log at the bottom. He was more frightened today than yesterday. Yesterday there'd been the shock and novelty, but today the horror was sinking in. He wanted very badly to go back home but knew that was impossible until Aunt Jenny was buried. He thought of pretending he was sick, but his mother would send him to a local doctor and his lie would be found out. What if Butch wasn't lying about KADAVA being able to slip around through space like some kind of hobgoblin? Brad would never be safe again, not if he ever did anything to make Butch angry. Nor would anyone else who pissed him off. He hoped Mother wasn't planning to adopt Butch. Before she made any decision, he needed to warn her about KADAVA. But he didn't dare to, and even if he did she wouldn't believe him. Finally Butch emerged from the crevice and climbed down the hill. She's looking real strong today, he said. I think she's about ready to go to work. Brad followed him through the weeds and watched him reset the empty trap. He baited it with a carrot he'd stolen from the refrigerator to lure another unfortunate creature, some new blood to feed the horror. I don't know what you and that thing are planning to do, Brad said. But whatever it is, I hope you wait till I'm back home. KADAVA waits for no one, Butch said. He headed to the garage, saying he needed to build another trap because she was going to be hungrier now. Brad sat on a folding chair and watched while Butch used Earl's tools to construct some wood frames and nail chicken wire onto them. Earl's tools and work table took up so much space there was no longer room for two vehicles. His own pickup truck was parked in there, but Jenny's Toyota sat outdoors. Mother stuck her head in the garage doorway and said, "It took me forever to find you boys. Katie and I are going to get some groceries. Do you want to come along?" "No thank you, Aunt Jane," Butch said. He was being more polite than usual, and Brad figured he was hoping to be adopted. "We're kinda busy." Brad wanted to go, wanted to get away from this nightmare for a while, but Butch shot him a look that said don't. "I guess not," he said, and a couple minutes later Mother's car pulled away. Butch pounded the last nail into his trap and headed out of the garage, leaving the tools in disarray and a mess of sawdust on the work table. He set up the new trap near the others, and the boys were about halfway back to the house when Earl appeared from behind a blackberry thicket. He was peeling a long slender branch with his pocket knife. "We better run," Brad said. "Won't do no good," Butch said, and he didn't move. Earl folded his knife and came closer, swishing his switch back and forth. "You been messin' in my garage, boy," he said. "It ain't your garage," Butch said. "It will be soon enough. It's my wood you cut up, and it's my chicken wire. Get your pants down and bend over that there log." Butch just stood there. He had his eyes shut and Brad saw his lips moving but couldn't hear any words coming out. "I said get them pants down." Earl swung his switch. It whistled through the air and caught Butch across the face. Brad was staring at the angry pink welt on Butch's cheek and didn't see where KADAVA came from, whether she leaped out of a tree or fell from the sky, but before Earl could swing his switch again she was riding on his back. Her talons sliced the veins on one side of his neck, and then her mouth was pressed against them, slurping noisily as she sucked the spurting blood. Earl let out a fierce roar like an enraged bull, but KADAVA cut it short by slicing his windpipe open. Now there was a wet gurgling of air and phlegm through the slit trachea, and Earl tottered and reeled with the naked creature hanging on his back, still sucking and slurping. He fell face forward, and as he thrashed on the ground in his death throes she kept her mouth plastered to the gushing blood, not wasting a precious drop. Brad ran and hid behind the blackberry thicket. Through the thorns he saw Butch rubbing his hands together with glee and heard him yelling, "Brilliant! Brilliant! KADAVA rolled Earl's body over and straddled it, her movements quick and jerky like a reptile's. She crouched forward, popped out one of his eyeballs and ate it. She did the same with the other and then began to devour his face. Brilliant! Butch yelled. Terrified and sickened, Brad backed slowly away from the blackberry thicket. He was trying to be perfectly silent, but the back of his foot caught on a vine and he stumbled to his knees. The creature tore her face away from her feast and stared at him with her bloody mouth hanging open, and for a moment he stared back, too frightened to move. Then he was racing frantically through the thorns and brush, and when he got in the house he locked the kitchen door. He grabbed a long butcher knife from the counter and ran to the front door to lock it too. Mother and cousin Katie were still gone. The only other human in the house was his dying aunt, and he pulled up a chair and sat beside her cot, preferring her company to no company at all. The knife was trembling in his hand, and his whole body was shaking inside and out. Soon Butch was pounding on the back door and yelling to be let in. Brad ran to the kitchen and stared out the window in the door with the knife raised, and even though he didn't see KADAVA anywhere he had a hard time forcing his shaky hands to turn the lock. Butch barged in with a wild look on his face, grinning and grimacing and letting out shrill peals of laughter. "You think that stupid knife's gonna help you?" he said. "If you piss me off, nothing in the world's gonna save your ass." Brad could barely speak. "Is she going to come in here?" he managed to ask. "If you piss me off she will," Butch said. He let out another spurt of crazed laughter and grabbed a set of keys from the counter. "Come on, we're gonna drive Earl's truck down the road and push it in the ravine," he said. "You can't drive a truck." "Can't you? When Earl ain't round I drive Mom's car all over the place. She's too sick to know what I'm doing. Hurry up, them women will get back pretty soon." "Why do you want to push his truck in the ravine?" "So the cops will think Earl got drunk and drove off the road. But there won't be anybody. So they'll think a bear drug him away. At least they won't be snooping round here. Tomorrow we'll hide his bones where nobody'll ever find them." Brad didn't know if he'd be in more danger going with Butch or waiting for his mother. "I better wait here," he stammered as he followed Butch out to the garage. "Mom might go looking for me if I'm not around, and you don't want her to see what's back there. Just please tell that thing to leave me alone, will you? She'll leave you alone if you keep your big ugly mouth shut. You rat me out and you're dead meat." Butch got in the truck, started it, and scooted the seat forward. "If them women get home 'fore I do, tell 'em you don't know where Earl went." He did a reasonably competent job of backing out of the garage. Brad watched him turn onto the road and then went back in, got the butcher knife, and sat in the chair beside his aunt. Though she appeared to be asleep, he wondered if she'd heard Butch say he was going to push Earl's truck into the ravine. His hands were no longer shaking, but now he began to sob uncontrollably. His shoulders shook and his throat was soon tight and sore with crying. He hoped he could get himself under control before his mother came back. He heard a whispering sound and saw his aunt's lips moving. "Trouble," she said very faintly. Her eyelids were shut but fluttering, and she kept saying the word over and over. "Trouble, trouble." Aunt Jenny stopped whispering, and then there was only the sound of a fly buzzing against the lampshade. After a long time Brad heard his mother pull into the driveway. He wiped his wet face with his bandana, returned the knife to the kitchen, and went out to the car to help her carry in groceries. "Where's Earl?" she asked, looking at the open garage door. "I don't know." He carried in some bags of groceries and started putting things in the refrigerator. There were packages of frozen lasagna for dinner, more pop, and several more bottles of wine. It looked as if the women were intending to feel no pain. "Where's Butch?" Mother asked. "Outside I guess." "Hey, cuz, bring me a bottle of pop," Butch called through the screen door. He was sitting out there on the back stoop, as if he'd been there the whole time. "Get it yourself," Brad said. He went back to the sick room and sat beside his aunt until supper was ready. Butch was unusually cheerful and polite while he devoured his food and washed it down with cherry pop. He even asked Brad's mother if her room was comfortable and said he was enjoying her visit and hoped she would continue to visit after his mother was gone. Brad knew he was trying to butter her up so she would adopt him, and he knew there was nothing he could do about it. He scarcely touched his lasagna, which looked too much like Earl's mangled face. The women were pouring down plenty of wine again, and Katie soon pushed her plate aside and lit a cigarette so she could concentrate on her drinking. "It's nice not having that asshole Earl around," she said. "He must be in town getting drunk." Butch smiled sweetly and said, "Why don't I wash up them dishes while you ladies relax?" Brad said he was tired and went upstairs to Butch's room. He lay down fully dressed on his air mattress and stared at the darkness, wondering what he should do. Though he'd barely slept the night before and was exhausted, he didn't think he'd be able to sleep. But he soon drifted off and was still soundly asleep several hours later when a scream awoke him. He sat up, too terrified to move. There was enough moonlight coming through the window for him to see that Butch's bed was empty, nothing there but the teddy bear staring at him. The woman was still screaming, and he couldn't tell if it was Katie or his mother. He sat paralyzed with fear until the bedroom door burst open and Mother came rushing in. "I think there's an intruder in the house. Are you all right, honey? Where's Butch?" "I don't know. We need to barricade this door," she said. She grabbed Butch's chair, wedged it against the doorknob, and asked for his cell phone. Brad stood up, still fully dressed, and got it out of his shirt pocket. His mother's hands were shaking so badly he had to dial 911 for her. She grabbed the phone and started whispering into it, as if afraid somebody in the house would overhear her, and her voice was so hoarse and hysterical that the operator kept making her repeat everything. "It's horrible, horrible," she was saying. I got up to go to the bathroom, and her bedroom door was wide open, and there she was, laying on the floor in a pool of blood. "It's my niece Katie, I already told you that. Her throat's been cut open and it looks like her whole body has bloody wounds all over it. It's horrible, horrible." While she was talking, Brad pulled the chair away from the knob and opened the door. He stuck his head into the hallway and yelled, "Butch? Where are you?" "I'm with my mother," Butch replied, his voice coming from downstairs. "Butch, you have to let me and my mom go. She's never hurt you in any way, and neither have I. I haven't squealed, I swear I haven't. Come down here, cuz, and we'll talk about it," Butch said. His mother was tugging at his arm, trying to pull him back into the bedroom, but she was so weak with fear he scarcely felt her. He stepped out into the hallway and crept slowly down the stairs, his mother behind him, pleading with him and trying to pull him back up. In the dim light of the living room lamp he saw Butch lying in his mother's sickbed. KADAVA was there too, lying naked between him and what was left of his mother. Her torso was ripped open from abdomen to sternum, and KADAVA had one of her hands inside the carcass, reaching beneath the bare ribcage. Brad's mother screamed, then sank into a chair and fell silent. From beneath Aunt Jenny's ribcage, KADAVA extracted a white slimy mass of flesh, and Brad realized it must be a tumor. She stared intently at Brad while she chewed it delicately, as if it were a gourmet treat. Her eyes looked just like Butch's, like dark blue polished stones. She was larger now, as tall as Aunt Jenny. Her breasts had swelled, as if she were pregnant, and greenish-yellow pus was seeping from their swollen nipples. Butch was lying on his side holding her like a lover as he watched her chew the tumor. "I'm gonna let you and your mother go," he said. "But you better get out of here right now, 'fore I change my mind." "The cops are coming," Brad said. "I know, but it don't matter now. I won't be here. KADAVA's gonna take me with her. We're gonna slip through the doorways of space and go someplace better." "Where are you going?" "To her world. Don't worry about me, cuz. Me and KADAVA will be together, and that's all I want. I love her." Butch leaned his head down and began to suck the yellow pus seeping from her nipple. Brad's mother was so faint he practically had to drag her to the car. They were halfway to Clarkton when they saw the sheriff's car coming toward them, and Mother got it to stop by flashing her lights and honking. When the sheriff and his deputy arrived at the house, KADAVA was no longer there, but Butch was. Lying in a fetal position in the cot beside his dead mother, he was quietly weeping. The next morning they found Earl's remains out back. Though Brad claimed he knew nothing about how Earl died, he told the police about KADAVA. Mother also told them she had seen something in the sickbed with Butch, though she wasn't sure what. The police didn't believe the stories about KADAVA, and the coroner's report stated the bite marks on all three bodies perfectly matched Butch's jagged teeth. The papers labeled him the cannibal boy. While Butch was incarcerated in a juvenile facility awaiting trial, he somehow managed to get his hands on a wire coat hanger. He straightened out the wire and plunged it through one of his eyeballs deep into his brain. Despite everything, Brad felt sorry for him. Butch had believed KADAVA would take him away with her, and they would slip like spirits through the doorways of space to a better world, but instead he had been abandoned by yet another parent.